Hey, this is Bud Wren and my friend Kevin Jordan, and we're back again for another episode of the 12-2 podcast. You rolled your eyes there. Was there a reason for that?
No. I'm sorry.
No,
we are back. I'm just amazed that I'm back.
We're glad to be back, right? I thought we're glad to be back. We're always glad to be here.
So, just out of curiosity, who you got picking for the March Madness to win the whole thing?
I just did my brackets, and I had to go Duke. I mean, I don't have a lot of faith. I don't. After seeing what Virginia did last night in the ACC, I'm like, what's the ACC even doing in the tournament? But hey, I'm going to go. I got Iowa State and Duke in the finals.
Okay.
How about you?
I haven't done my bracket or anything, but I picked Purdue to go all the way.
Purdue. Well, they got incentive. I would be okay with me. Didn't they lose to the 16 last year? I think they did.
Don't know.
I think they did, and so I kind of feel bad for them. They're a good team.
Yeah.
So I would like to see them do well.
We were talking about it last night. So.
Plus, I was in Indiana the last 2 days, so my Indiana friends will probably, if any of them watching this,
or listen to it,
they'll
be happy, right?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly. So what are we going to talk about, man?
Well, I think we're just going to continue on about authority.
Yeah, authority.
Yeah, God issued authority.
That word.
Yeah. And, as believers, we believe that all authority flows from God.
Yes, we do.
And, if you go in order of Scripture, the first authority structure he ordained was family. Then we see after the flood, government, and then eventually it'll be the church that we see. And we've already talked about government and church and that. And I'll just put in a plug. The Essential Church is a documentary that talks about the fight with the whole COVID thing and Grace Church out in California. And I would recommend the documentary. You can get it on Amazon, and we'll get Chris to put a link in the show notes or something like that.
That's a good idea.
And so you can watch it if you're interested, and I would highly recommend it. So
is it freebie?
No, I think it's like $1.99. You can rent it, or you can buy it for $7.99. So it's not too expensive. So
when you're talking about authority, Kevin, one of the things I find is interesting, right, is when I'm out with my clients, in the business world, one of the things that I always make mention of is that true leaders, because there's a difference between managers and leaders. We use those things interchangeably, those two terms, and we've made them labels when they are really functions. Leadership is a function, management is a function. They're different, but management is inclusive within leadership, but leadership's not inclusive within management. We'll talk about that maybe on one of our podcasts at some point. But one of the things that I always make points with executives, and I did it just the past couple of days, is that true leaders cannot be true leaders without moral authority.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Moral authority is if people are going to follow you, right? If you're in a role where you need people to follow you, you've got to have moral authority. And I never get pushback on that. Everybody totally buys into that. They totally agree with that.
So what do you mean by moral authority?
Well, moral authority, basically, and when I explain it, because I get that question quite a bit, it gives me a chance to speak to the fact that there is a standard of ethical behavior and ethical grounding that is consistent and that it is grounded in something, because you can't use the term grounded if there's nothing to be
there's no
grounded in, right?
Right.
And the grounding is in a pre-established set of moral standards. And what I'm seeing is that I'm getting a lot of buy-in with that. But then again, they're the same. A lot of the folks are probably ones who may be buying into standards that really don't have anything to do with the biblical morality. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but there seems to be a lot of hunger for that and understanding. I just want to throw that out there to you, because we didn't talk about it beforehand, but it hit me when you mentioned authority. Right. That it's a good thing.
Yeah. So, I guess today, if we're following along that, we'll go back to the first authority structure that God ordained, and that was the family from the very, very beginning, from creation. And you can't look at our culture today, Western culture, or the culture that we live in here in the United States, and not come to the conclusion that the family has been under attack.
Oh yeah.
I mean, It is, and it has been under attack for several decades, if not for the past century.
And for a number of those decades, we probably didn't even really realize it.
No.
In the church, we had no idea.
Yeah.
Until it got to a certain point, right?
And I will say this is, I believe the origins are Satan within himself. I mean, he has gone after. I mean, he went after Adam and Eve from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And they and God's creation, he created Adam. And he actually breathed into him and gave him life.
Yeah.
It's God's actual breath that brought us to life. And then out from Adam, he created Eve, and to be a helpmeet, to help him in his God-given task of maintaining the garden.
Yeah.
It was Eve. And I just find it interesting that from that first scripture, Adam talks about, hey, I'm supposed to leave my mom and dad and cleave to my wife. And this was before that Adam didn't have any parents.
That's true.
But he knew that
so does he have, did he have a belly button? That's the question, right?
I don't know. Maybe when God was done, he said, you're done.
We'll figure that one out one day, maybe, right?
Right. Yeah. But from that very beginning, husband and wife were the foundation that God established from the beginning. And he did set it up. I mean, any type of, any type of structure, any type of grouping, there has to be some type of hierarchy.
Absolutely.
I mean, it can't be chaos.
Yeah.
And we don't like that word hierarchy a lot of times.
And we don't like the word authority.
And we don't like the word authority. Yeah.
A lot of people don't, yeah.
And so within a hierarchy, I mean, when you get people together, whether it's on the playground or whether it's in the prison or whether it's in government, there will be some type of authority established. It's just the way it is. And God definitely established an authority, a hierarchy within the family. And before we necessarily get into that, going back to this hierarchy, and, people have denigrated by saying the patriarchy is, has gone after that whole patriarchy idea of,
right.
and how bad it is and how terrible it is. And it's the root of all our problems.
Yeah.
And
I've heard that somewhere.
Yeah. And the question is it?
No.
I don't think so.
No.
And I don't think that when you look at culture as a whole, you can't say that patriarchy as God ordained it is a detriment to civilization. In fact, I think patriarchy as God ordained it is what created the civilization that we have enjoyed for so many years.
And that is the key point. It is not the system itself that God created that is the problem.
Right.
It is the way that we either live into or don't live into the system that God created. And because we're so good at blaming God these days, and one of Satan's tools is to tear down the creation ordinance,
the creation order,
right, the order and all that. So that's what he attacks. Isn't it funny where you see a lot of times when chaos occurs, it's because someone is trying to take away or destroy something that someone else built.
Yeah.
You think about that?
Yeah.
And that's the exact thing that Satan tried to do in the garden, and when he tried to totally eviscerate the authority structure that's there to God. I mean, to God.
Right.
Before we even get to the patriarchy.
Right.
Kind of
Yeah, exactly. Because God had, when we think about the garden, we think that God had created man, placed him in the garden, and he gave him one rule. You can eat of any tree in the garden, but you cannot eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Yeah.
And then God creates Eve, and it was Adam's responsibility to relay God's rule to his wife, which he did because when Eve meets Satan near the tree, I assume, she says, we're not to eat of this tree, she added to it, or touch it.
Right.
Lest we die. Yeah. And so, we see that Adam had relayed what God had told him to her. And I find it interesting, Satan went after her. But here's the thing, he goes after her, he deceives her. And the thing that he tells her is, you can be like God. And
Yeah.
it's that
Yeah.
that opportunity to be God, to be like God, that gets us in trouble so many times. It's
Yeah.
that pride thing.
Well, but what is it about the pride? You think what's the bottom line? What is it that is so seductive there to be want to be like God? So okay, what does that mean? Does that
That
mean
means that authority lies within myself.
and I get to do
I get to do what I want
what I want?
or dictate to others. I am the final authority.
Yeah. Do you
Yeah.
think that Eve was thinking? I don't know. It's speculation. Do you think that
Speculate.
Eve was thinking that I get to create my own world now because God created this world? I don't know.
I
It's
don't know.
interesting. We
I don't
We'll
know.
never know.
Yeah. But I do find it interesting. It was not the fact that Eve ate the fruit that plunged humanity into sin or death. It was the fact that Adam knowingly
knowingly.
ate that fruit, and he wasn't deceived.
And he's the one that had the direct encounter with God about that, right?
Exactly. and what we see there, even in the direct encounter, is so many times we try to obfuscate our responsibility.
Yeah.
Especially as men, we do it all the time. We blame other people. We blame
Right.
our situations. We blame the cards we were dealt for where we find, for the decisions that we've made that have resulted in where we find ourselves. And Adam made that decision. I'm going to disobey God. And
Yeah.
he made it in full knowledge of what he was doing.
Yeah.
And when God called him on the carpet, he goes, "Well, ultimately, God, it's your fault because you gave me the woman."
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
So-
of course, the serpent did me in. So everybody was passing the buck. One of the natural orders of creation, not natural, one of the unnatural orders of creation that we created, right?
Right.
Is this whole pass the buck kind of mindset.
Right.
And that is so true. We always blame something, right?
Yep, we do. And so then sin passes from Adam to the rest of us.
Yeah.
And it's through Adam. So, so when you get into the church and you're looking at family and we're looking at the family structure and how did God ordain the family to function, and we look at the attacks that have been wrought against it, and I find it interesting in the fact that if you go back 100 years or a little over 100 years, you see Marxism come about, and Karl Marx hated. There were a few things he hated. He hated the current government structure as it was, because he wanted to overthrow that. He hated the church and religion and anything to do with God. In fact, his buddy Engels, called it the opiate. Religion was the opiate of the masses.
Right.
But he also, more than anything, he hated the family structure, because he knew if he had to destroy that structure in order for him, what he thought, for communism to come about. And we see that with with Marxism playing out in, Russia, China, Venezuela, Cuba, that one of the things that has resulted in that was a destruction of the family as a solid unit during that time. We see it more subtly in today, where we see cultural Marxism and we see the attack on men and women. We see that, men, there's this attack of trying to keep men from walking in manliness, that toxic masculinity, and just, so, and even as starting as little boys, you see that most of the young boys in elementary school or whatever the case is, a lot of times they're over-medicated, overstimulated, and overfed.
Yeah.
And that results in a true manliness dearth, basically, once they get older.
Yeah, they're not trained and all. So
they're just grown-up boys.
Well, that's the way a lot of adults are, right?
Right.
I mean, they're just grown-up children. Now, just to make sure, we have to admit, obviously, there are a lot of men who we just screw it up, right?
Oh, yeah.
We don't follow the biblical order of masculinity and all that good stuff. We buy into the culture, right?
Right.
That's why we're here. We're talking about Romans 12:2 and the fact that we're trying to help people understand what the Scripture says. So it's not that it's not the structure. It's not God's design that's the problem. Right?
No.
So we got to keep emphasizing that and making sure that nobody thinks we're talking about that being the problem. Right? It's the destruction of it. And Marx is a great example because his real enemy was God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
It was, yeah.
So, what best way to beat God than try to destroy the things that God created at the foundational
his first authority structure that he set down was the family.
Yeah,
And,
that's a great point.
yeah, and so it's that destruction that he's looked at, and it was funny because that last night I was having dinner, and we have Taco Tuesday every Tuesday, except we were eating hamburgers last night.
Yeah, that's a popular place. Your Taco Tuesday.
And so
cool.
I was asking my daughters in my own, and one of my daughters had a friend who's they're all similar age in their mid-20s, and kind of knowing that I was going to be talking about, or we were going to be talking about this, I kind of asked them.
They asked what we were going to be talking about?
No. I asked them because I knew what we were going to be talking about.
I was hoping they would actually be interested in what we're talking about.
Well, they'll probably listen because they knew that I was going to bring them into this. But I asked them, talking about family structure, I said, when you hear women submit or wives submit to your own husbands, what do you think? And it just was interesting. And the first reaction that they had, of course, was they wanted to tell me all the abuses that have occurred with that verse, which I think is unfortunate. And thinking of that, I mean, that's what we spent probably most of the conversation on.
No surprise, really.
Right, because that verse has been used within the church to push women down.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about the verse, and this of course comes from Ephesians 5, where Paul talks about the family structure, and it's wives submit to your husbands. But prior to that, the verse prior to that talks about all of us are to submit to
one another.
Well, to Christ first.
Well, Christ first. Yeah.
Yes, we are to submit to Christ. So if we as believers want to be followers of Christ, the first thing we have to do is submit to him and what his word says. Then we can put the family structure in the right format.
Agreed.
Which is wives submit to your husbands, and then Paul follows that immediately up with husbands love your wife as Christ loved the church. So here's the thing that kind of hit me was the fact that, there's so much fear with wives submit to your husbands of that being used and abused. Patriarchy, the evils of patriarchy. We've got to destroy the patriarchy because it sets, women up to be abused by their husbands or abused by men. But that's only if you ignore the second part of that verse. The protection of women and the protection of men lording over women or abusing women comes in that next verse. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. So if you love something like Christ loved the church, if you love someone like you love, because the later verse says, hey, husbands, love your wives like you love yourself. Yeah. If you do that, you're not going to abuse your wife. You're not going to lord over your wife.
Yeah.
You're going to make sure that she is provided for. You're going to make sure that she has the protection she needs. You're going to make sure that you're leading her, because it was interesting when we got to the end of the conversation. I said, what do you want in a man? And the first thing they said is we're hoping, first of all, we don't want to date boys, and we hope we don't want to marry, boys in a man's body.
Right.
What we hope is we want to find somebody who will lead us.
Yeah.
And I found that interesting coming out of the mouths of 20-somethings.
Well, the qualifier you mentioned, as submit to Christ, right?
Correct.
As we should. And again, that verse that is also in there, which about submitting to one another, that is another qualifier, right? Because that means you and I are to submit to each other, right? I mean, does that mean we're to lord over each other? No, it means that we are to respect, to take careful consideration of each other. Right?
Correct, yeah.
And try to create win-win, mutually beneficial situations that are going to benefit and grow the kingdom of God, right? Through our families, right? Through ourselves, through our families. So I think I agree. So there's at least two significant qualifiers, and the most important one you brought up: submit to Christ, right? Secondly, submit to one another, and because of that, getting the whole abusive thing, the thing where the abuse is prescribed by the system of what Paul's trying to get across, is a real stretch.
Yeah.
It's a real stretch, and you got to stretch that a long way to get there. And so we take the one of the words we get, the aggressions of the day that we hear about when the abusive situations do occur, and we just simply paint with a really broad brush the
Right.
whole picture, right? Based on a few things that are wrong and that are contrary to God's command there. About the
And I
patriarchy.
would even go so far as to say that if you are a husband and you do not love your wife like you love yourself, or like Christ loves the church, then you are in sin.
I would agree.
You are in sin. And here's and this is where the church has a little bit of issue. And I'll just be honest with you. I mean, I saw this firsthand happen in my own family, where I saw a young lady who was willing to submit and submit to her husband, but there was an issue on the love your wife as you love the church, or as Christ loved the church, and love your wife as you love yourself. And so there was an issue there. And at the time, the church that was being attended, the elders failed. Once it was brought to their attention, the elders of that church failed to do anything. And because they were unwilling to call out the husband and to, say, hey, we need to do something, the marriage fell apart.
Yeah.
And so I see, this whole structure, of God-given authority to the family, the wife submitting to the husband loving the wife. And, if you go further on, the children are under that. So the children don't rule the house.
Right.
The children are to obey, and the husband or the father is not to exasperate the children.
Right.
So there's all these balance. God, it's a beautiful thing that God has created, where there's these balances, there's these checks and balances, so that the family can run according to the way that He ordained it, even in a sinful world.
One of the things and it's a great point, because one of the things we talk about, like in our government, right, we have checks and balances,
Right.
but we don't talk about the fact that the family structure has checks and balances.
Right.
The role, what the man does in living that life that is following Christ in order to create a scenario where it is easy, maybe easy is not a great word, but it's doable for her to submit to him. We're not going to be able to cover all that today.
Oh, no.
We're just kind of touching on the broad base of it. And you mentioned too, when you're thinking about, and when I married my kids, and when I did the ceremony for your daughter, right?
Right. My middle daughter.
I said so. And I said this to my son Jacob. I said it to my son-in-law Hayden. I said it to your son-in-law Josh. I said, so the big deal, Josh, for example, I know you're willing to die for her. Are you willing to live for her? It's easy to say I'm willing to die for them, and that's great, but are we truly willing to live for them as well? And that's a dual thing. Both those things have to be going. And so I think that a part of submission, right, that we have to recognize is, you mentioned loving your body loving her as you love yourself.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. I love her more than myself,
Right. Well, we know, but it's that natural tendency. A lot of guys have a natural tendency, to, hey, when it comes time for me to do what I want to do, kick back. I'm going to fish all day on Saturday or whatever the case, watch the ball games, and maybe you need to spend a little time with the wife, or maybe spend a little time with the sacrifice what your desires are to make sure that they have, more above and beyond the provision that you do.
Yeah.
Make sure that they are, that they have what they need from you.
Yeah.
Basically. And I think that's what you're talking about. Are you willing to live for them?
One of the highlights of my marriage, right, was like a year or two in. My wife was teaching at a Christian school, right? And the school was notorious, kind of like for a lot of the ladies, kind of getting together and doing these weekend trips to the beach and all that stuff. And, we were still just barely, newlyweds a little bit. And so they were after Tammy to go. And finally she said, okay, I'll go. And I'm like, oh my gosh, for a weekend, I am going to be absolutely miserable. And I was. And when she got back finally, the longest weekend of my life, And I said, so how'd you like it? She said, well, I ain't doing that again. That was the happiest day of my life. I said,
Right.
good,
Yeah,
good, because
right.
I was miserable, you know? So there's something to that.
Well, yeah, definitely. Bet you ate a lot of ramen.
Well, yeah, something. But this whole thing is really problematic today because I think we probably agree that this lack of the observance of the patriarchy, right, and spills over into so far beyond the family. Right?
Oh, yeah.
That when we don't have that, it's if we're not going to respect the family, we're not going to respect the government. We're not going to because we're not going to build a government that is perhaps as respectable as it should be in terms of the way that God originally created that.
Well, even look at culture in our society itself. We're take Chicago for instance.
Mm-hmm.
They have a terrible problem of young men killing each other. Indiscriminately shooting each other for whatever purpose, whatever you disrespected me. I want your
sport, right?
Right. And it's a place though where there is hardly any male leadership within the home.
Yeah.
I mean, for lack of a better word, most of the guys there have donated some biology and then left the scene.
Right.
And it is unfortunate young women having to raise boys that has resulted in death and destruction and chaos within a culture and a society. And it's not just limited to that. You can go to any place where you see men not in the home, men not taking on their responsibility, men not loving their wives, men not committing to the wife and the children to be there, to raise them and to pour into them and teach them how to live life. We see that there is chaos in that. And when you see, though, solid family structures, whether they're believers or not, there is a semblance there. The children are much more, have fewer problems, less likely to commit suicide, less likely to get in drugs, less likely to end up on OnlyFans if you're a girl. And the statistics are there. And it just goes back to God's plan for the family and his authority structure.
If we just stick with it.
It's amazing how it works.
It really is. And this whole movement toward progressive, we call it progressive. No, it's regressive. That which goes against the traditional biblical standards and authority, et cetera, that's not progressive. That's regressive. And what are we doing? We're progressing away from that which God has
against that which
has ordained
and has proven to work. For thousands of years.
And we're using it. And what I despise about it is we use words like progress. Progress means in the original, the meaning, the etymology of the word, something that's positive, right?
Right.
And the only thing that's positive about the way we've defined progressivism to us, and the reason it appeals, it goes back to the garden, right? Because the way we're defining progressivism, it means that I get to rule my own life, and I get to do it without God, and I get to do it without the authority that really, or obeying the authority, recognizing and obeying, living in the authority that comes from Him, right?
Right.
Being subject to that.
Yeah.
So it kind of circles back, doesn't it?
It sure does. And on that note, I think we're going to have to get out of here.
Yeah, I think we are. But I don't think we're done with the conversation.
No, we're probably not, but that's okay.
Yeah,
anyway.
Well, maybe we should ask folks, let us know what you want us to talk about. You
Just put in the show notes, send us a message or whatever the case is. I just thank you for listening.
Yeah, and let us know.
To us.
And you don't have to agree with us, right?
No.
You can push back. That's okay.
Yeah.
We're
the 12:2 podcast. We just, based on Romans 12:2, we do believe transformation comes from changing the mind because,
because God said it first.
Right. Exactly. So
Makes
anyway,
sense.
like us on, give us a like on the YouTube, give us a 5-star rating on Apple, and, tell your friends about us.
Yeah, hope you like us. If you don't, well, we will grow on you. Keep watching. Thanks. God bless. Have a great week. See you next week.
Bye.